November 30th, 2022. A single line of code goes live in San Francisco. Within 5 days, 1 million users. 2 months, 100 million. The fastest growing app in human history. The app, ChatGPT. And in just 48 hours, it vaporized $100 billion from Google's market cap. Here's the twist. Google didn't just know this technology existed, they invented it. Their own researchers wrote the breakthrough paper 5 years earlier. They had the talent, they had the models. So, how did Microsoft and a scrappy startup eat Google's lunch? This is the trillion-dollar AI war, the story of how Microsoft stole Google's future using Google's own invention. For nearly a decade, Google wasn't just in the AI race, they were the race. In 2014, they spent $500 million to buy DeepMind, a London lab filled with some of the sharpest minds on the planet. Just 2 years later, DeepMind's AlphaGo program shocked the world by beating Lee Sedol, the world champion at the ancient game of Go. 280 million people watched that match. When AlphaGo made move 37, a move so brilliant that Lee Sedol left the room, the crowd went silent. It was the moment humanity realized machines weren't just faster than us, they were smarter. At the same time, Google's in-house research team quietly published something even bigger. In 2017, they dropped a paper called Attention is All You Need. It introduced the Transformer model, the architecture that powers GPT-3, GPT-4, Gemini, Claude, almost every AI system today. That single paper lit the fuse for the AI revolution. Google had just handed the world the blueprint to replace them. They just didn't know it yet. By 2018, CEO Sundar Pichai declared, "We are now an AI-first company." And nobody laughed. Nobody doubted him. At that point, Google had the brains, thousands of the world's top AI researchers, the money, $100 billion war chest, the monopoly, 90% of all searches on Earth. They were untouchable. Microsoft, they were the punchline. The company gave us Clippy and Internet Explorer, desperately trying to stay relevant while Google owned the future. And yet, being king has its price. When you dominate an industry, every bold move risks killing the very business that makes you rich. Google had the science, but they were about to make a $100 billion mistake that would hand their crown to their biggest rival. While Google sat on their crown, Microsoft's Satya Nadella was quietly sharpening a sword. In 2019, he made a move almost nobody noticed, a $1 billion investment in a small San Francisco lab called OpenAI. At the time, OpenAI wasn't a company. It wasn't selling products. It was a nonprofit research outfit backed by Sam Altman, Greg Brockman, and for a time, Elon Musk. To most people, it looked like science fiction with no business model. But Nadella wasn't betting on today. He was betting on distribution. Microsoft had something Google didn't: Office, Windows, Azure, products embedded into the daily lives of over 1 billion people. If OpenAI could provide the brain, Microsoft could plug it into everything. And Nadella didn't stop at $1 billion. Over the next few years, Microsoft poured in a staggering $13 billion, locking in exclusive rights to OpenAI's most advanced models and guaranteeing they would run on Azure. It was a partnership that changed both companies forever. Then came November 30th, 2022. ChatGPT went live. 5 days later, 1 million users. 2 months later, 100 million. The fastest adoption of any app in history. And thanks to Nadella's gamble, Microsoft had the inside track. Within weeks, he did something unthinkable. He strapped ChatGPT onto Bing, the punchline of the search world, and suddenly people were actually talking about Bing. Then he went bigger. Word, Excel, Outlook, Teams, all rebranded with Copilot. In just months, Microsoft transformed from the company that gave us Clippy into the company redefining the future of work. And the man once seen as a safe, boring CEO was suddenly being hailed as the boldest visionary in tech. For the first time in 20 years, Google was on the defensive, and Nadella was just getting started. When ChatGPT exploded, the panic inside Google was immediate and absolute. Within days, CEO Sundar Pichai declared a code red. It was the kind of internal alarm usually reserved for existential threats. And for good reason. Google's core business was search, and more than 90% of its $283 billion in annual revenue came from ads tied to it. If people started getting answers directly from AI instead of clicking links, the golden goose was cooked. Here's the irony. Google wasn't blindsided. Their own teams had already built large language models on par with GPT years earlier. They had the talent, they had the compute, but management kept them locked away, terrified of breaking search. Now, with Microsoft suddenly on the offensive, Google had no choice but to respond. Sundar ordered Bard, their chatbot project, to be rushed out the door. And that's when disaster struck. During Bard's very first demo, it confidently answered a question about the James Webb Space Telescope incorrectly. The internet noticed immediately. The next morning, Alphabet stock plummeted nearly $100 billion in market value. Investors panicked. Employees whispered that Sundar's job could be on the line. Morale tanked. The company that invented the transformer model, the very foundation of ChatGPT, suddenly looked like it didn't even understand its own invention. And while Google was fumbling in the spotlight, Satya Nadella was grinning on stage, declaring, "This new race starts today." Microsoft wasn't just catching up. They were storming Google's fortress, and the cracks in the walls were only beginning to show. The AI war wasn't being fought on one battlefield, it was being fought on two, and both carried trillion-dollar stakes. The first battlefield was search, Google's golden goose. In 2022, search brought in over $162 billion in revenue, more than half of the company's total. Factor in YouTube ads and the broader ad network, and it ballooned to over $283 billion a year. All of it depended on one simple habit: people typing questions into a box and clicking links surrounded by ads. If AI gave people answers directly, that entire empire crumbled. Microsoft knew they couldn't topple Google overnight. Bing wasn't going to suddenly dominate. But by strapping ChatGPT onto Bing, they did something even more dangerous. They planted doubt. They showed the world that Google could bleed. And once that seed was planted, investors, advertisers, and users all started asking the same question: what if Google isn't untouchable? The second battlefield was cloud. And this was where Microsoft had been sharpening its blade for years. Large language models like GPT aren't apps, they're infrastructure hogs. Training and running them requires thousands of GPUs, billions of dollars in chips, and data centers the size of football fields. Whoever owned the infrastructure owned the future. Here, Microsoft had a secret weapon. Azure was already a strong number 2 behind Amazon Web Services. But now, thanks to that $13 billion deal, every advanced OpenAI model can run exclusively on Azure. Companies around the world that wanted GPT-4 didn't just sign up for OpenAI, they signed up for Microsoft. Google Cloud had brilliant technology, but market share was barely half of Azure's. And every public stumble with Bard reinforced the perception that if you wanted serious AI in production, you went with Microsoft. The irony was brutal. Google had invented the science. Microsoft was turning it into business. And while Google scrambled to defend its search fortress, Microsoft was building a new empire in the cloud, one that could outlast even the biggest collapse in ads. But here's the truth. In the early days of AI, both giants stumbled. Microsoft's Bing experiment was messy. When they first bolted ChatGPT onto search, the internet went wild, but not for the reasons Satya Nadella hoped. Users started posting screenshots of Bing AI going off the rails, professing love to journalists, threatening users, even trying to convince one person to leave their wife. It was part genius, part fever dream. Entertaining, yes. Trustworthy, not quite. The hype cooled fast, people laughed at Bing's answers, then quietly drifted back to Google. Market share barely budged. Google, meanwhile, was flailing. They rebranded Bard as Gemini, leaning hard on DeepMind's credibility. They promised safer, smarter AI, but the rollouts were shaky. Headlines focused less on breakthroughs and more on missteps, biased outputs, factual errors, and awkward demos that sparked more memes than confidence. The difference wasn't in the mistakes themselves. Both sides made them. The difference was in the stakes. For Microsoft, errors were just the cost of being bold. They didn't make their living off search ads. If Bing went rogue, who cared? The real prize was embedding AI into Office and Azure, products with recurring revenue and enterprise lock-in. For Google, every stumble was existential. A bad demo didn't just embarrass them, it threatened the $283 billion engine that kept the company alive. So, while Microsoft could afford to experiment in public, Google looked like it was unraveling in real time. And as the two tech giants stumbled forward, a bigger question loomed. Who would figure out the future first? The bold attacker or the cautious defender? So, who actually wins the trillion-dollar AI war? Right now, Microsoft looks like it's ahead. By baking Copilot into Office, Outlook, Excel, Windows, and Azure, they aren't just selling a chatbot, they're rewiring how hundreds of millions of people work every single day. It's AI not as an app, but as an infrastructure. Google isn't dead, far from it. DeepMind is still the most decorated AI lab in the world. Gemini is catching up to GPT, and their custom TPUs, chips designed in-house, give them raw hardware firepower even Microsoft doesn't fully control. The next phase of this war won't be fought over headlines, it will be fought over three brutal battlegrounds. First, chips. Right now, NVIDIA owns the market. They've become the pick-and-shovel company of the AI gold rush. But Google's TPUs are already showing they can train massive models faster and cheaper. Microsoft, meanwhile, is cozying up to AMD to diversify away from NVIDIA's chokehold. Whoever secures the GPU supply chain or builds their own wins the foundation of AI. Second, assistants. Chatbots were just the opening act. The real money is in AI agents that don't just answer questions, but take action. Imagine booking flights, running meetings, filing expenses, even coding entire apps, all automated. Whoever cracks the leap from talking AI to doing AI doesn't just win search or Office software, they win the future of productivity itself. Third, regulation. Governments are circling, the EU, the US, China, all drafting AI laws. Billions are at stake in how these rules get written. If regulators kneecap big tech, scrappy players might thrive. If they tighten the field, only giants like Google and Microsoft will have the scale to comply. This isn't a sprint, it's not even a marathon, it's a chess match, and every move in the next 12 months could decide who locks in dominance and who risks losing everything. Because the winner won't just own AI, they will own the future of computing, and maybe even the future of work itself. So, how will history remember this battle? If Microsoft comes out on top, it will be remembered as one of the greatest corporate pivots of all time. A company mocked for Internet Explorer and Clippy will have reinvented itself as the bold visionary that turned artificial intelligence into everyday infrastructure. Satya Nadella, once seen as a safe, boring CEO, will be remembered as the man who bet $13 billion and changed the trajectory of Microsoft forever. If Google rallies, the story flips. They'll be remembered not as the pioneer who stumbled, but as the giant who refused to die. The company that invented the Transformer survived its own panic and rewrote the future once again. Sundar Pichai will be remembered not for Code Red, but for turning crisis into rebirth. Either way, the stakes are unprecedented, because this isn't just about two companies. It's about the future of how we work, how we learn, how we live. Whoever wins this war doesn't just dominate AI, they dominate the future of computing itself. And the wild part, the battle is still wide open. Within the next 12 months, one of these companies will either cement its dominance or lose everything. Because what makes this story so gripping isn't just the technology, it's the leadership, the strategy, the decisions made when everything is on the line. And this isn't the first time a company's survival hinged on one bold pivot. In fact, another brand once faced its own do-or-die moment. They made a move so risky, so shocking, it reinvented the entire industry. That story is next.